welcome to the study. I thought today we could make a timeline of Britain from the Paleolithic to Queen Victoria. So I'll use a paper. It's an A4 sheet, so we will only put a few important events on it, just to make a framework with which we can jog our memory and build upon with other events. I think we'll use a pen. And a ruler or straight edge. Now we're just making a loose framework, and we only have an A4 sheet, so I'm not going to make the years to scale. We're just going to draw rough estimates. Let's start by dividing the line roughly in half. So we have BC on one side and AD on the other. And at the top, we'll write Britain timeline. So we start with 12,000 BC. This is the Paleolithic Era, roughly, and a lot of these eras I write will be a little bit rough, give or take 2,000 years. Some of them are actually still being debated, but that doesn't interest us. We're just making a basic framework for our minds onto which we can fit everything else that we know or learn. Now, why do we start in 12,000? I've picked that because it is the end of the last ice age, and the first people arrive and settle in Britain. Then we're going to jump forward, although not to scale, because we don't have enough room. Mesolithic Era or Old Stone Age, Britain experiences warming climate. Six 1000 BC, very significant date. The historic landslide in Norway caused a tsunami, went across what is now the North Sea and flooded Doggerland, a big part of the land that connected the continent of Europe together with what is now the British Isles. And gradually the English Channel was formed as the water level rose. So in 6000, Britain becomes an island. 4000 BC, the Neolithic Age or New Stone Age. Farming comes to Britain, and there is evidence of stone tools and one or two examples of copper. 2500 BC, the Bronze Age. What happens in Britain? The beaker people, the bell beaker culture, make it to Britain, and Stonehenge is built. So it's the age of the stone circles. Elsewhere we have the Minoan civilization. And the beginnings of the Old Kingdom of Egypt, when the pyramids were built. BC. The Late Bronze Age and the Uffington White Horse is carved into the side of a hill along the prehistoric ridgeway. Elsewhere, what's happening in about 1000? The Trojan War and the Age of Heroes in Greece. (600 BC), Early Iron Age. Celtic peoples are now populating the British Isles, and hill forts are built similar to the one in Uffington that we walked around in a previous video. 600 BC and 43 AD. Very important date, if you remember, which is the Roman invasion under Claudius as emperor. So what happens in these years? We have all of the Celtic tribes in Proto-Roman Britain. And there is evidence of trade with the rest of Europe and sometimes beyond with these tribes. In the 400s, we have the Peloponnesian Wars in Greece between Sparta and Athens in about 323. Alexander the Great dies in Babylon, and 146 Rome conquers Greece. Also in this time would be Cyrus the Great of Persia. What happened after the Romans invaded? It's a very, very interesting time in British history. Britain essentially became Roman, and Rome became Britain after a very long history. It was in 410 when the Romans, or the seat of the Roman Empire in Rome, could no longer support Britain with military troops. Britain was being invaded from the east, incursions from the north as well, from the Picts. But at the same time, Rome, having put down rebellions in Gaul and Spain and along its eastern frontiers, all the way from Germany and the Netherlands to Syria and the Caucasus, had no more to give to the West, and Emperor Honorius wrote to the Britons to look to your own defenses. And that was the end of Roman administration and rule in Britain. However, by this time, the Britons had ceased to think of Rome as invaders, and in many ways thought of themselves as Romans, and had their own administration that mirrored or was closely built on the Roman. Very practical and effective administration. Alas, they did not have the material and the resources to keep it up. It wasn't long after 1249 that the Angles and Saxons arrived and stayed, and then in 787 the Vikings arrived. Invasions and incursions continued, and there was constant fighting over land and control between Danelaw and Saxon law, and Danish kings and Saxon kings. Until the island was mostly unified, and the language became predominantly an Anglo and Saxon Germanic dialect with bits of Celtic, bits of Proto-Roman Latin, and bits of Scandinavian Germanic mixed in. However, in 1066, the Normans invaded. Under William the Conqueror, bringing the Norman language to Britain, and beginning of Middle English as a language developed. Elsewhere in Europe in this century, in 1095, Pope Urban II declared the First Crusade, giving a vocation and occupation to errant knights that needed to be controlled, as well as nobles. Also, in 1215, under King John, the Magna Carta was signed in Britain and elsewhere in the world, with incursions into Europe. Genghis Khan, head of the Mongol Empire that spanned Asia, in 1485 is the Battle of Bosworth, and Richard III lost his crown to Henry Tudor, the beginning of the Tudor dynasty in England. Elsewhere in Europe we have, as well as Britain, from about 1337 to 1415. Can you guess? The 100 Years' War. That was Henry V, so before Bosworth. And 1415. This date you should know. A man named Johannes Gutenberg developed the printing press, and 1453, the Fall of Constantinople. The last of the Eastern Roman Empire, Shakespeare dies. And 1603. We're running out of space, aren't we? I was afraid we might. 1603. Elizabeth I dies, and it's the beginning of the Stuarts' rule over Britain when James came down. James VI from Scotland came down to be James I. The Stuarts, and just before we have, I'll put it down here, 1588. You must know that one. Spanish Armada. The defeat of which rendered Britain a sea power. 1686, the siege of Vienna. Lots happening, but we're only putting a few highlights in. And let's go to 1714. Queen Anne dies without issue, and it's the beginning of the Hanoverian line, or the Four Georges. George of Hanover came over, the closest relative. What other dates are there around this time? 1776, of course, American independence. 1770, Cook maps Australia. 1789, French Revolution. And of course 1805, Gibraltar, the Battle of Trafalgar. 1815, end of the Napoleonic Wars and the Vienna Congress. That redrew the map of what would become modern Europe. But if we're to fill in everything, I think we'll be too crowded. What happens in 1838? Queen Victoria ascends to the throne, and the rest is history. And there we have Britain, from the Paleolithic to Queen Victoria, with a few milestone or mile markers of major events, so that in your mind, as you learn more and more history and more things are found out and excavated, you will be able to fill in this framework. This has been fun to have you here sharing this timeline with me. I hope you found it relaxing and calming, and that you have a beautiful, beautiful day or night. Be good to yourself. Be kind to others. And, as always, be extra